what will lead to a good story is this. People have been calling for people to wake up, take a look at what's going on here. I think people are already woken up, but they haven't got out of bed yet. So it's time to get out. First step is to wake up. We've passed that. I mean, how can you not be awake with what's going on out here in the streets? Half the country is burning down, and people are marching. So yes, you are awake, but the second step is to get out of bed, put your feet on the floor, and get moving on some action. There are a lot of things that need to be done. Let's take a look at the police officer, now former police officer, who I won't use the term murdered George Floyd. I will use the term lynched George Floyd. And let me explain that. You can go on Google if you haven't seen them already. I have a ton of them in books and stuff. Pictures of lynchings, pictures of Black men hanging from trees, while a white crowd stands around smiling into the camera and pointing at the bodies. Even families, little girls, adults. This is, and these things were turned into postcards, where they would mail the postcards to their family members outside of their town or outside of their state to say, look what we've done. This is how we address our nigger problem, or whatever. All right? Those people are not the ones in the tree. The people on the ground, posing for the pictures, looking into the camera and smiling. Those are lynch mobs. They go grab somebody off the street, or they're in cahoots with the law enforcement. They leave the key, the door unlocked so they can come in and grab the person out of the jail cell and take him and string him up on a tree. That is a lynch mob. When I saw what was happening to George Floyd, and we've seen that many times before. We saw it with Eric Garner, same thing, for selling loose cigarettes. He was choked to death on camera saying, I cannot breathe. When I saw that with George Floyd, you had two guys sitting on his legs. He's already down on the ground on his stomach, handcuffed. He wasn't moving, he wasn't resisting. And you had Derek Chauvin with his knee on his neck, choking him. And the other officer standing there trying to hold people, passers-by on the sidewalk from coming too close. Looking into the camera as he's murdering somebody, as though posing for a picture. What I saw was a lynch mob. A lynch mob made out of the very people that we pay to serve and protect. It was nothing less than a lynching, and done with blatant, wanton disregard for the law, with pure impunity, because he never thought anybody would ever come after him, even if he was on camera killing someone. He had already shot and killed 2 people. This man had 18 complaints against him in his personnel file. 2 of them involved shootings in which 2 people died. Now, I don't know of any other institution except for, and I'm probably going to catch some grief for this, except for perhaps the Catholic Church. I don't know of any other institution that allows you to have that many complaints against you. When you are a police officer, you are given a license to kill. Like James Bond, you are given a license to kill, if necessary, to use deadly force. There was no need for deadly force with George Floyd. When you drive your car, it's because you are given a license to drive your car. And if you are out there driving drunk or high on drugs and the police pull you over, they give you a ticket for what we call in this country a DWI, driving while intoxicated, or a DUI, driving under the influence. And if you get 1 or so, you may possibly still retain your license. You'll go to court, they'll send you to some treatment, rehab or whatever, They'll fine you, maybe put you in jail for a couple of days, and then you're back to, your normal routine. But you get a second one or a third one, they're going to pull your license. You're not driving anymore. If a doctor has 18 malpractice complaints at the hospital, you can rest assured the hospital is going to get rid of that doctor because they're going to shut down that hospital. How can a man who has 19 years on the police force with 18 complaints, that's almost one complaint per year, still have a license to kill, to be a police officer after he's already killed 2 people? Now he's killed a third. It was not a question of if this is going to happen. It was just a question of when is it going to happen? And it happened, almost 2 Mondays ago. Now, the things that need to be done, nobody was listening. Nobody has been listening to us for decades, for over a century, when we've been talking about police brutality. And even when that man had 18 complaints against him, that's 18 voices that went unheard. Because if they had addressed just one of those 18 complaints and retrained that officer or reprimanded him or pulled him off street patrol or whatever, George Floyd might be alive. And all this stuff about, well, George Floyd had drugs in his system, he was a criminal and blah, blah, blah. None of that is relevant. The courts decide how to punish criminals, not the police. Your job is to arrest, bring them in, and let the courts and the judge handle the rest of it. You're not, executor and arrestor and all in one. People need to listen, and now they're starting to listen. And the reference that I made about the Catholic priests, time and time again, we hear about these priests who have abused little boys for over 40 years, and they're still serving. The place where, when they get in trouble, the place where they go is right near my house. No matter if they got in trouble in California or New York or right here in the DC area, the holding place is right here in Silver Spring near my house. They are brought there, they're held there for a while by the Catholic Church until they figure out where they're going to send them, and they send them to another congregation, another parish, somewhere outside of where the abuse occurred. And sooner or later, guess what? They're abusing somebody there. And then they come back to this holding place and they get sent somewhere else. Nothing changes. They just keep getting moved around. Well, these police, when they get fired, there is no repercussion after that, unless they go to court and get put in jail or in prison for it for years. When they get fired from one force, and they're still able to roam around, what do? This is all they know. They go join another police force. And you have cops that are bad cops that have been on multiple police forces. So they get fired from one, they go get a job at another one because they have the experience. We need a national registry for cops who have been fired for using these kinds of tactics, for any kind of justifiable complaint, and they get fired for that. Their name needs to be on a national registry, so when they apply for a job at another police department several states away, they won't get it. It's just like the sex abusers national registry in this country. You abuse some kid in California, and your name goes on that registry, it's visible to anybody hiring you in New York City. And this person's a child abuser. No, we're not going to hire this person. That's one of the things that we need for these serial police officers who engage in serial misconduct. And there are a lot of other things that can be done. One of the other things, and then I'll close for my answer here, is everybody talks about good cops and bad cops. I say no. There are 3 categories And people often overlook the third category because it's the minority category. When I say minority, I'm not talking about ethnicity or anything like that. I'm talking about the least popular, the very small in numbers. We all know what bad cops do. A good cop will not do those things, but the good cop will not tell on the bad cop. In other words, he will not be a snitch because they have that blue wall of silence, that blue code of silence where you don't reveal other things about your fellow officers. All right, so a good cop won't participate in the misconduct, but he will not tell the superiors on that. The third category of police, which I say are the minority, the smallest group, are the honest cops. They will not do what a bad cop does, but they will report it. They will tell. And as a result of their doing so, there is retaliation against them because their name leaks out. And next thing you know, when they go on a call for something and there's a shootout and they're calling for backup, other police in the area hear the call for backup. They're like, I'm not going to go back him up. He broke the code. He snitched. So they don't care if you get shot or not. One of the honest cops that a movie was made about many years ago, he's still living in New York. He was with the NYPD. His name was Frank Serpico. And the movie Serpico was all about that. He was an honest cop, and the cops shot him for being honest. All right. So we need a mechanism by which good police officers can tell on blow the whistle on their fellow officers without their identity being revealed and getting repercussions and ramifications as a result of their telling. Just like when a crime is committed and the police have no clue how to solve it, they put out an announcement to please call this number if you have any information. You can call it anonymously, you get a reward. We need that same kind of anonymous kind of thing for police officers. And we need an outside body to investigate the complaints of police officers. You can't have the police investigating the police. Sure, while there are some decent, honest cops in internal affairs who are out to nail the bad cops, there are plenty who have risen to that level who will not prosecute the bad cops below them. You know why? Because 20 years when they were out, 20 years prior, when they were down on the streets patrolling, they were doing the same thing. They were using excessive force, taking bribes. So why are they going to condemn some other officer who was doing exactly what they did 20 years prior? So we need an outside source to look at these cases, and I think that will help and go a long ways.
I fully agree with you, Daryl, about the nature of policing. I agree with the three categories of cops entirely. I also agree that there needs to be an independent outside entity overlooking and administering complaints of police brutality, and that letting the cops investigate themselves is plainly not working. Well, one thing I think is overlooked over and over and over again, and it's overlooked because of people's political attachments, is just as the Vatican was the entity that shuffles around these priests after they've raped children to other places where they can be shielded from accountability, the police union is the entity that shuffles around bad cops and shields them from accountability for their actions. If we look at George Floyd, look at Eric Garner, you could go down the list tragically of name after name after name after name of unarmed black people who were murdered by police. The number one reason why the cops are not held to accountability is because the police union protects them. I'm all for organized labor. I think organized labor is an important part of our economic structure. But when organized labor of any type is more oriented to exonerating their labor union members no matter what, rather than focused on the excellence of their labor union members, organized labor becomes a part of the problem rather than the solution. And the police union is a perfect example of that. If the police union spent half as much energy focusing on the excellence of being a police officer, which means you don't use excessive force, you don't abuse your license to kill, if they spent energy on that rather than exonerating these cops that are plainly wrong, that would have a huge effect to reduce police brutality. And I think that needs to be front and center going forward. And I think it's a very interesting moment we're facing as a society, because the police union now in Minneapolis and in a broader sense, they understand that they're under scrutiny like they've never been under before. But we have to keep that scrutiny on that particular organization and not just like on cops as a general thing, not as, and this is an instance where, while I agree there's systemic racism, it can also become a red herring if we're all like systemic racism without looking at the police union. And the fact is that left-leaning political people, progressive people, the majority of people who are out here shouting Black Lives Matter are just like abhorrent to point their finger at a labor union and say, hey, there's a problem here. So we need to have honest conversations with ourselves and with our society and get outside of our political attachments and realize that the solution isn't within a dogmatic political approach, but within a thoughtful, open-minded approach so we can see all the elements that are creating these problems.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100% on that, on the police union thing. I've gone back and forth with presidents of the local FOP and various police unions. Another thing that is false, when the police chief comes on the TV or the newspaper or wherever, or the police public relations officer comes out and makes an announcement. First thing that happens is when a police officer does something and it's questionable or whatever, they will say he followed proper police procedure. And in the rare case, because they always say, I feared for my life. That's their catchphrase that gives them justification for killing someone. In some cases, it's true, but when they use it all the time, it's like the boy that cried wolf. But then in the rare cases where a police officer is convicted in court, then the public information officer or the chief changes the story. Instead of saying, he followed proper police procedure, it was a justifiable homicide, etc., a justifiable shooting. Then they say, well, in a department this size, you're bound to have a few bad apples. I've heard that so many times over the last 35 years that I've been doing this kind of work. That is a lie. And any police chief or public relations officer, public information officer says that, I'm calling that person a liar, flat out, because there are more bad apples in the police department than there are good ones. And I'll tell you how I come to that conclusion. Because if you have that many good police officers and you only have a few bad apples, wouldn't all the good ones get rid of the bad ones? When they go to the union, go to the police chief and say, hey, listen, I joined this force to do what was right. I don't want to let some crazy guy tarnish my badge who's supposed to be my brother or sister on this force. If you're playing football or basketball, or you and I, Arno, were in bands together, not together, but we were in bands. But if one of your musicians is not playing what he's supposed to be playing that makes you look good, you fire him and you bring in another guitar player or whatever. If you're on the basketball court and one of your teammates is not being team friendly and doing something else, you bench him and bring in somebody else. We don't drive around with 18 DWIs and still have our license.
Daryl,
yes, Rebecca.
Yeah. I was gonna. I want to be sort of provocative and
absolutely. Let's roll.
Yeah, I know. Right on. I know you can do it. I disagree with you.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. And just really briefly, the reason that I'm doing this work, other than, you know, it's been a calling my whole life, is that when I used to work in psychiatric hospitals, I witnessed people literally torture in sort of the guise of managing these chaotic, disturbed patients, do things that we would never do towards another human being. And it was, you know, people of mixed races. And I mean, in other words, they weren't, the individual wasn't, there were multiple different races. And the way people behaved towards incarcerated, insane people was dehumanizing. And so then I began to look at the work of Zimbardo, who has looked into kind of the nature of evil, but he's also the one that was looking at the torture that was happening in Abu Ghraib, I think is how you pronounce it. And so, and then I also, by the way, used to work with perpetrating priests about 30 years ago at the institution that's in the DC area. It used to be in Maryland.
Near my house.
Yeah, and I worked for a year. It was only a year, but I really saw the Catholic system basically hold its own in order to protect this larger system. And people used to say to me all the time, well, do you think that priests or people that are struggling with their sexuality go into the priesthood? That's not the case. They're not going there to repress their sexuality. They're going there because they have a calling. And I would say to you that police officers initially go into the work because they have a calling, but the system it perpetrates and groupthink. And that's what I think is the most dangerous thing, is that you could say that it's police officers, and there is something about, you give somebody a baton, or you give them, a baton, or you give them a gun, and they do behave differently. And then you put them in a group where they've basically got the lives of others, and all human beings begin to behave badly, sadly. So my thought is, yeah, I agree with you. Hit that system, the policing system, because it's you know, like what they're learning about the Fraternal Order of Police and these unions that basically perpetuate their capacity to continue to not police itself, so to speak. But the danger of people turning into police, and you can even see it with this sort of violence begets violence, where people do things that they would not otherwise do if they are either in a system that naturally dehumanizes the people with whom they're encountering. So the police are trained to dehumanize and detach from their subjects, or same thing with mental health workers. And then I think Marcus has done a lot of work around this, how we are all capable of doing this kind of evil if we're in the right situation. And I think that sadly, that's the most frightening thing, is that we have to be sure that we do not succumb to that. Even the protesters, that they don't succumb to it, to that impulse. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, let me give you some pushback.
Pushback.
Okay. You ready to roll? All right. So I agree with what you're saying. That, you know, some people get into that groupthink mentality, but that is not always the case. All right, because I've gone to school, high school, with people who would become cops, and I can tell you something: when bullies in my school became cops, guess what? There were bullies on the police force. When the goody two-shoes, as we call them, do everything right by the book, never got in trouble, etc. They're goody two-shoes. When they became cops, they're still goody two-shoes. So, they do the right thing. They're the honest cops. And I know them personally because I went to high school with them. And I know this kid was a jackass in high school. He was always beating up on people, and now he's a cop. Oh my God. he's out there doing the same crap. You know, now he has a license to do it. Before he was always in the principal's office. Now he's got a license to do it. So yes, there are people who fall into group, their followers, sycophants, or whatever you want to call them, who fall into that group think. But then there are people who are individuals who just have it in their nature to be that way. And as far as the protesters go, let me explain something that I don't think a lot of people understand. And let me be clear that I'm not advocating and I'm not justifying the destruction of property and burning down buildings and all that. The looting, absolutely not. Okay, that is just flat out wrong, and destroying some little mom and pop store, you know, that is just flat out wrong. Again, I'm not advocating you go to corporations and burn them down either, exactly. But I understand why it is happening, and let me explain it to you, so you'll have perhaps understand. Because people are always asking me because I'm black. Well, Daryl, why do black people go and start burning down everything, even in their own neighborhoods? Why are they burning down these places? Let me tell you why they're doing that. They have been asking not to be treated specially, but to be treated equally for over 100 years. And they have not received that. They've been shut down. You know, we don't want to hear it. We're not going to hear it. We're not going to listen to it. All right? And nothing changes. When you are driving and you run through a red light, or you are speeding and the cop pulls you over, what does he do? He gives you a citation, a ticket. If you do something to somebody and they take you to court, they sue you. If you committed a crime, the judge imposes a fine upon you. If you don't pay your credit card bill on time, you get a late penalty. All these instances I just gave you examples of cost you money. Nobody wants to be charged money. Nobody wants to separate themselves from their money. And so when people impose a fine of money upon you, it's meant to curb your behavior, so that you won't speed again and you won't run that red light again if you have to pay $150 for doing it. Or if you did something to somebody and they sued you and won $50,000, you're not going to do that again. All right. If you got a fine on your credit card bill because you paid because it's late and you get a charge, you're going to pay it on time the next time. All right. So money talks. Money is able to make somebody change their behavior. So when these people go out and they burn down these buildings, yes, a lot of it is out of anger and out of frustration. And of course, there are always going to be anarchists who come in and do it for the joy and just to instigate stuff. But the people who are serious about their cause and they participate in this kind of thing, it is their way of writing a speeding ticket or imposing a fine upon the city, because it's going to cost the city money, millions of dollars, to rebuild for not listening. And now, all of a sudden, when the country is burning to the ground now, they're starting to listen. So fire does make changes. Again, I'm not saying I advocate the burning down of buildings and all that and destruction, but it does have a way of getting somebody's attention because it hits them in the wallet and it curbs that behavior.